Okay. Great. Oh,
Yeah, everybody works. I checked this.
okay.
Yeah. Wait, let's have it done.
Now let's start the recording.
Yeah. Yeah, locally or the cloud, what is better?
Cloud is always better, I guess.
Cloud is better.
Well, do we have cloud space?
So once you record it locally, then your computer went off, and then
Yeah, I know
link
this can happen.
as well.
This can happen, yeah.
Yeah,
So
can't happen with the cloud.
yeah, but I mean, I can access this. It's just a question how much space. Maybe tell us it.
Yeah.
Anyway, we're on YouTube now. So
Would be such a pity if it would.
could someone check these whether we are actually on YouTube? We have 1 minute to go.
And check it.
No.
I shouldn't play with the. Or does it have any switch or something?
Yes.
We're on.
Okay.
All right.
It has.
Yeah, I guess probably
It's still not recording.
Sorry.
Oh, probably
Yeah, that would be good actually.
after the intro or just already okay.
No, you can start sharing the slides.
The thing is a full screen. Let me just share the whole screen, and then you.
And how do I use the arrow? The arrows?
To take
Yeah, it's fine.
That was my name.
Okay, good. Well, you and David should probably get back then.
Yeah, and this will probably also disappear in a moment, right?
Oh, yeah, hopefully.
Be made minimized somehow.
And I'm
What if you go to more? Is there anything?
yeah, this is the one. I think it's
Hide video panel? Would that be
no, I think it's
hide floating?
yeah, this is good. Yeah, very good.
All right. Okay, we're all set.
Oh, what about the speakers? The speaker?
Welcome, everyone. It is my great pleasure to welcome Kian Samikhani here in Geneva. Kian is a postdoctoral researcher at the University of Cologne. He studied physics and philosophy at the University of Bonn, where he also did his PhD a few years ago, and is the PI of a DFG project called Fundamentality in Physics and Metaphysics. He's working, as you probably already know, in the philosophy of space-time, the philosophy of quantum gravity. He's interested in fundamentality, the philosophy of time, unification, intertheoretical relationships like that. Generally speaking, the philosophy of physics, philosophy of science, and metaphysics. And he has a book which has just got out, published with Routledge, The Non-Fundamentality of Space-Time, and I take it that the talk will be partly on the material in the book. So please, Kian, welcome very much and take it away.
Thank you very much, Chris. Hope you can hear me all right. Many thanks for the invitation and the nice introduction. Indeed, so the non-fundamentality of space-time is this book, shameless self-promotion, and I will kind of talk about a few of the topics. The book is basically based on my dissertation from 2020 and just got out with Routledge exactly. So today I want to focus on mainly three topics. Mostly at the beginning I will talk a bit about what fundamentality is. because I feel that is often just pushed to the side, and then we work with the notion without actually having clarified what it means. And then I will basically sketch the main argument, or at least a certain way to present the main argument of the book. So I try to push things around a bit, and I hope it works out now, having done that quite lately. But yeah, and I will talk about a few problems and caveats at the end, and maybe we can also discuss this then afterwards. So yeah, maybe just so I will start to say about something about fundamentality notion. Then I will talk a bit about the argument, which is mainly concerning general relativity, but I will not really present any physics here. So I will just use basically certain results, and then come to the problems and caveats. So fundamentality in physics. What does this notion mean? It is usually applied to entities, equations, and theories alike, but it's hardly analyzed. It's often a primitive notion, which you can also find in metaphysics. So, for example, Jessica Wilson does use a primitive notion of fundamentality. So you do find that as well in metaphysics. If it's analyzed, you will have probably one of those three readings. Maybe there's more. So you have something which I would say concerns generality issues. So the fundamental equation or theory is, in this sense, then the most general, most conclusive, most accurate description of. Now I have to admit someone, I think.
Yes, you could admit that.
Yeah, hope it works. The most general, conclusive, and accurate description of nature, and then there's often some outline to that this is kind of connected to unification. Wald and Weinberg, for example, make this explicit. Then the second way how fundamentality is used in physics is in terms of composition, some kind of composition. So the fundamentality, the fundamental entities are then the uncomposed entities, elementary, structureless, simple, or as Weinberg says, boring entities. And the third reading is kind of literally a priority reading. So it's about what features at the highest energy scale. And it's in this sense then first that we can connect this to a cooling history of the universe. And I think that's about it. Maybe there are other notions. I don't claim that this is like exhaustive here. No. Okay. In philosophy of physics, we have also often a primitive, minimal meaning that is informed by physics. Surprisingly, unlike emergence, fundamentality is hardly analyzed by philosophers of physics. And there is an important exception. Kerry McKenzie does lots of work on this. There are others as well, of course, but yeah. Seminal papers don't define it. So Chris and Nick don't say what fundamental means, but they also don't use it that often in the paper, I think. Karen says that she's not sure what we should take fundamental to mean, and then continues to avoid the term and basically settles for something like micro-macro talk and these kinds of things. So there's maybe a skepticism towards the notion, I don't know. But there is also some explication in philosophy of physics. And then, so I found these three proposals here. The fundamental entities are defined in the kinematically possible models of a theory. For example, James Reed does this, use this notion. or the fundamental entities feature in almost all models of a theory or almost all solutions of some relevant equation in your theory. And then, interestingly, there's also the third package of notions, namely that the fundamentals are self-standing, autonomous, maybe ontologically distinct and primitive, or ontologically independent. And that is quite close to how the term is used in metaphysics. And I will come to that now. Oh yeah, okay. There are a bunch of related notions. Let's just leave it at that. In metaphysics, we then basically treat the fundamental entities as some kind of privileged, and then we have to further analyze what that means. Some kind of ontologically privileged is in the background here. So the question whether some entity is fundamental is not merely a question about whether this entity is on the list of what there is, but is about investigating its ontological status with respect to other entities. And that is then related to explanation. So fundamentality is a priority relation, an ontological priority relation that is typically assumed to follow from explanatory priority. And because explanations standardly are taken to be asymmetric, should be asymmetric, then the fundamentality notion is also usually taken to be an asymmetric notion, has a direction. And a tentative explication of what a fundamental entity means is usually given in terms of the unexplained explainer. So there's also the connection to explanations quite explicit. Karen Bennett uses building relations, so you could basically have a similar unbuilt builder for what the fundamental means. What is interesting about this tentative explication here is that it kind of already shows you that there are two main conceptions of the fundamental. One is upward directed and one is downward directed. And for example, Leuenberg adopts these two perspectives, the ungrounded, the unbuilt, the unexplained, and the all grounding, the explainer, the building characterizations of the fundamental. So there are two conceptions. And so one could say the absolutely fundamental entities are unexplained, therefore they are ungrounded or ontologically independent. And the second explication would be the absolutely fundamental entities are in the set of entities that explain everything else. Therefore, the fundamentals are part of what grounds or determines everything. So the first notion would be fundamentality as independence. The fundamental entities are the ontologically independent entities. And I will today mainly use that notion. So that's the ungrounded conception, and a typical methodology would be to look for reducibility. So if you see that some entity is reducible to some underlying structure, basically, then you show that there is some ontological dependence, i.e. non-fundamentality. And the second notion is fundamentality as determination, or as it also is called, completeness. Why completeness? Because the fundamental entities are part of the minimal complete set of what determines everything else. That's the all-grounding conception. And a typical methodology would be to use indispensability arguments. So you need this kind of entity to actually explain something or explain the world, ultimately. This can also be made like explicit in this very famous God metaphor. This determination notion, the fundamental entities are all and only those entities, minimal and complete, which God needs to create in order to make the world how it is. So now we have these two notions, and now we can ask whether there are any relations between those notions. So if we want to explicate fundamentality, it might be helpful if we end up with one understanding and not two. Or we should not use maybe the fundamentality as such, or we should at least explicate which notion we are using. The problem is that it's quite non-trivial to make the connection precise. So it is often taken to be the case that there is that they do seem to pick out the same kind of stuff, the same fundamentals, but here there are cases where the notions do come apart as well. So for example, if you have a building circle, then you have a complete set of so such worlds have a minimal complete set that determine, but these entities are not dependent. Quite the opposite. They are all not independent. Quite the opposite. They are all dependent. And then you can have proofs. What is necessary for something for the two notions to coincide, like Leuenberger does. But he also has in the same work shows that it's non-trivial. You can have like different perspectives on that. And what is also maybe interesting, so if you take this, okay, there are cases where the notions come apart, but now maybe this for our actual world, we actually don't see these kinds of cases. Or we could exclude them by principles that connect the two concepts. So for example, Karen Bennett says that here's one potential candidate for such a principle. Members of the minimal complete set that determine the rest in terms of this God metaphor are the members of this set because they are independent and not because they do the determination work. And so that would be a way to kind of bring those notions together. Just briefly again, back to this, I think quite interesting issue on the methodology. So as I said, both concepts of fundamentality correspond to certain methodological practices. And they do so in a way that these practices run counter to each other. They, as you would expect, maybe because there's an upward and a downward direction of this notion, they run counter to each other. So fundamentality as independence is used when we investigate whether there is a reductive explanation of some entity, for example, space-time. And then one is not accepting primitivity from some alleged indispensability of we need space-time to make sense of certain things. We still try to give a reductive explanation of that entity. And fundamentality as determination is used when we investigate whether some entity is indispensable for explaining something else. So say the error of time or something. Maybe that is indispensable for certain explanations. And we are satisfied in this mode of methodology by that and refuse to give a reductive account. So that would be some kind of indispensability argument here. Yeah. Now, if reductive explanations are feasible, and we still posit a primitive entity, then this certainly introduces some redundancy, but it might even introduce an inconsistency. For the following reason. Fundamentality as ontological independence implies a sense in which the fundamentals cannot be inconsistent. And that is because the fundamental facts should be freely modally recombinable, as it's usually said. So since the fundamentals do not depend on each other, they cannot be combined without restrictions. There are at least some kinds of restrictions at play here. And this implies that they cannot contradict each other. So fundamentality as independence implies demanding some type of consistency. And that would mean that positing, for example, the error of time may not be as innocent as it seems. Now, if you turn this around, then you can look for theoretical inconsistencies in your theories, maybe, or unsatisfactory explanations, and can interpret them as such unresolved tensions within the fundamental posits. So, in other words, hidden dependence relations among the allegedly independent posits can occasionally show up as theoretical inconsistencies. And maybe a standard example would be positing quantum matter fields, the Heisenberg uncertainty principle, and the fundamental continuous metric may lead to inconsistencies. So if an interpretation builds on entities that were assumed as independent and hence freely modally recombinable, but they are actually not, then we may find that this interpretation is inconsistent. So the key question for today is now, is space-time fundamental? So in this sense, is space-time ontologically independent? And I have to, I think, two side notes on that. So first of all, this issue, fundamentality versus reality. The traditional question in the philosophy of space-time was whether space-time is part of the ontology of our world, so whether it's real. Then there would be the substantivalist and relationalist debate. And the modern question, and for example, Jill North makes that point, is does space-time enjoy ontological priority in the sense of independence or determination? Right? So is the whole debate is about fundamentality of space-time, not about the reality of space-time. So even if space-time is part of the ontology, we still have to answer the question whether it's part of the fundamental ontology, and that would be like the shift of focus here. And I think that this has advantages. So focusing on fundamentality has advantages for the philosophy of physics. First, there are two general reasons. On the one hand, we kind of value the input from new physical theories better if we do that. Because new physical theories do not just tell us and do not just give us an update on what there is, but specifically about the dependence relations between the entities that exist or that they posit. It also guards us against what I will call formalistic or literal theory interpretations. So we would posit fundamentals just because they appear in some relevant equation, for example. And in the space-time case, specifically, I think that focusing on fundamentality and dependence relations helps us to bring together two so far largely separate debates about relativity theory in a fruitful way. Another side note is, I think I'm obliged to do this. So I should heed my own call that we need to specify what space-time actually means, because it can mean different things, and I will from now on basically mean metric structure, so the metric field. And then
just the metric field without manifold.
So I will focus, so I don't, maybe space-time means more, but I will now specify the claim here to space-time metric fundamentalism. And that is the claim that the metric field is fundamental. Yeah. So maybe the manifold is as well or something, and space-time is both. Exactly. So that's perfectly fine. From now on, I will just focus on this, what I called space-time metric fundamentalism. And that position would argue that the metric field, or would claim that the metric field is fundamental. The metric field is ontologically independent. Now, in the following, I will have two ways to challenge this independence claim, basically. Two independent challenges of that independence claim. One is presented by Brown and Pooley's dynamical approach. And that could be framed as the coincidence problem. So as a matter of logical norm, they write, if one postulates space-time structure as a self-standing autonomous element in one's theory, so as an ontologically independent element, it need have no constraining role on the form of the laws governing the rest of the theory's models. So far, so yeah, I continue a bit with the standard law on the dynamical approach. So Brown basically asks what explains what is geometry doing here, codifying the behavior of free bodies in elegant mathematical language, or actually explaining it. Geodesics could be interpreted as the ruts or grooves in space-time which somehow guide the free particles along their way. So that would be one kind of way to explain this. But it is a spurious notion of explanation that is being offered here. I think that's in response to Nerlich's argument for it. At the heart of the whole business is the question whether the space-time explanation of inertia is not an exercise in redundancy. So again, it is non-trivial, of course, that inertia can be given a geometrical description. But what is at issue is the error of explanation. The notion of explanation that Nerlich offers is like introducing two cogs into a machine which only engage with each other. It is simply more natural and economical, better philosophy in short, to consider absolute space-time structure, metric structure, as a codification of certain key aspects of the behavior of particles and of fields. And after this criticism, basically, the central claim of space-time metric fundamentalism needs to be accompanied by a second claim, which is kind of a chronogeometric requirement. So material rods and clocks built from matter fields survey the metric field because the symmetry properties of the matter field dynamics coincide with the symmetry properties of the metric field. So that would be the claim. And then the critics, like Brown, can again say, well, either there is no explanation because you just have coincidence, or it's an implausible explanation. For example, metric determines the matter field properties. Not for example, but explicitly that. Or there is some kind of extrinsic dependence going on. So the coincidence is explained, for example, in virtue of something else like equations of motion, where the two fields are always coupled to each other. And in contrast, the central claims of the dynamical approach by Brown and Pooley would be chronogeometricity. Just side note, that's the property of a field to act as the metric field that is built from the content of the material content of your theory. So chronogeometricity is not a property that geometrical structures have intrinsically, but extrinsically. So in virtue of the dynamics of matter fields, specifically for the dynamical approach. And then the second claim is that fixed background structures, for example, the Minkowski metric, are ontologically reducible to the dynamical symmetry properties of the matter fields that constitute physical bodies. So it's in special relativity, it's kind of a relationalism that is proposed here. So now step back, dependence relations. The dynamical approach can be read in terms of dependence as follows. The metric fields depend either partly or fully on the matter field content or the matter field dynamics as you wish. In the partly it depends. The partly an example for partly dependent is the G field. Only the chronogeometricity of the G field is dependent on other stuff, basically. And for full dependence, you can look at the Minkowski metric, which is fully reducible, so non-fundamental. It's just a codification for certain symmetry properties of matter fields, namely Lorentzian, of course. Now to the second type of dependence here. So is there another dependence relation for G? I think there is, and that's given by spin-2 theory, which posits this equation at some point in when you have the derivation, you will use that equation, you will use that identity to end up with full GR. So yeah, that's the metric field. Of course, that's in Minkowski metric, and that's a new meta field, which, by the way, really is the full deviation. So that's not just some small term or something. It's really the full deviation between eta and G. And that is supposed to be an empirically equivalent view of GR. Now, how do we interpret that? One possible interpretation would be in terms of ontological reduction. So we read this here as an ontological reduction of G to eta and H. The idea is, as typical for ontological reductions, entities at one level are nothing more than entities at some other level, specifically a lower level. So G is nothing more than eta plus H. And then the equation here is the bridge law for that reduction. In terms of dependence, we can say G depends on eta and H. And in this reading, even the space-time metric fundamentalist can accept G as an ontologically dependent, that is, non-fundamental entity, because then just eta is the fundamental, the new fundamental metric field. So that would be fine. This would leave us with a different ontology. So the standard interpretation has G as fundamental, and the spin-2 interpretation has G as non-fundamental. It fully depends on the fundamental entities to which it is reduced to, namely eta and H. But there is a problem, as typical for such reductions. Because the bridge law is an identity, it is a symmetric relation. So we cannot just simply read off such an ontological reduction from that symmetric relation. We don't get the asymmetry out of that relation. We don't get the fundamentality relation that we want to have, which needs to be an asymmetric dependence relation. In other words, we can just we can say, okay, we have some dependencies. So we have a dependence of G, eta, and H, but we can move that all around. We can have H dependent on G and eta, and so on and so forth. We don't get a definite asymmetric dependence relation here. So any inference to what is fundamental doesn't work at that stage yet. So we need a new proposal, and that would be to combine the two critiques we've just discussed. Here are the respective problems again. So the dependence relation of the dynamical approach only helps for fixed fields and chronogeometricity, but not G. And the dependence relation of spin-2 theory has the problem that it is symmetric. So let's come back to that equation. There is a sense in which the spin-2 view separates what is mixed in G, namely a fixed metric part, you could say, and a dynamic gravitational part. And note that this is exactly feasible because gravity is universal. So for other interactions, you couldn't do that. In other words, there is a sense in which the dependent and the independent structures are separable in spin-2 theory. So we clearly separate what is dependent and what is independent in that proposal. So what does that mean? The new proposal would be to have a dynamical spin-2 view, combining the two. then H is a new fundamental ontologically independent matter field. But eta ontologically depends on the symmetry properties of matter fields, including H, including the new field, because that has also a Lorentzian symmetry property. So this equation cannot be read in terms of a part-whole relation anymore. Because eta is supposed, one part of that, G, is actually also dependent on the H. So you don't have a clear part-whole relation anymore. So we are urged to not read this literally, not just read off the metaphysics from that, from the formalism itself. And then by combining these two threads, we basically pave the way for a non-fundamental reading of space-time metric, of the space-time metric, already in classical GR. Okay. So there was one problem, the symmetry, asymmetry problem. Now there are further problems. Which, so they are actually, I think, I'm not mentioning all, but so we are in classical GR, and now we have like support for space-time non-fundamentalism, space-time metric non-fundamentalism, I should say. So it suggests, what I just presented, I think suggests that the metrical aspects of space-time are already non-fundamental in GR, could get a non-fundamental reading in GR. But to sway the skeptic, arguably we need more, because that is quite, I mean, it doesn't, for example, include anything that goes beyond GR. But even within GR, we can maybe have, we could consider like issues of explanatory coherence. The dynamical approach has these issues with miracles appearing, disappearing, and I think that the spin-2 approach also helps with that. We can also look at what is posited in like a standard geometrical reading of GR, a standard geometrical reading of spin-2 theory, or dynamical readings of the theories. And then we can compare how they like are in terms of parsimony, whether there's any one preferred. But even if we do that, we're still classical, and note that fundamentality as independence is always about all kinds of dependence relations to, so all dependence relations to all other entities. So there's explicitly or implicitly a unificatory perspective in the notion of fundamentality. Basically, it means you cannot draw conclusive conclusions on fundamentality without having first kind of discussed all kinds of dependence relations to the rest of physics. So the broader context of physics may be helpful, and you can then discuss whether continuity conditions from other parts of physics, for example, the Heisenberg uncertainty principle, could be such a continuity condition, whether this might help to boost the spin-2 reading I just proposed here. And as there is a quantum version of the spin-2, yeah, you might be able to do that. There are other qualifications, more technical qualifications, basically. So spin-2 theory and GR are not strictly equivalent. You have to have some argument why it's okay to have basically just globally hyperbolic solutions in spin-2 theory. But okay, maybe that's enough for all for what you need for our world. And arguably the theories are at least empirically equivalent with respect to these well-behaved solutions of GR. Yeah, so and then this works for these parts of what GR talks about. There has also been recently criticism by Niels and collaborators. So there's so much in the paper, but I just focus on this dilemma they present, which I think, correct me, basically gives the philosophical claim, right, of the paper. So they write, either the view of the metric field as a mere stand-in for a self-coupling spin-2 field in flat space-time is physically incomplete insofar as it requires recourse to GR, after all, or it leads to an absurd multiplication of alternative viewpoints on GR. So what I just presented is absurd, basically, which is fine. Yeah, so let me take the two horns in turn. So the reply to the first horn, which was that you need some recourse to GR to make this work, basically. And I'm happy to discuss this. This is my reply, and I think I thought about this, but I can obviously be wrong. So I'm happy to discuss this. So I'm asking myself, well, isn't that too strict, basically? What is permissible in such derivations? What kind of recourse to GR is problematic? Now, if you're not even able to conceptualize some essential notion of spin-2 theory within that theory, then that might be problematic. I agree. But as far as I understood the paper, it's mostly about the issue that you have several energy momentum tensors to choose from when you derive GR in spin-2 theory. And I think that problem might be less problematic. I don't know. So I would just think that such recourse could just be understood in terms of a shortcut to empirical adequacy. So we know that GR works. So obviously, we don't choose some energy momentum tensor that would violate that knowledge, would go against it. More generally, why should using prior knowledge, for example, from GR, in the context of discovering such a theory, break this view, especially when we discuss metaphysics? Unless, of course, you want to say that the mathematical derivation is essential for the interpretation, for the metaphysical interpretation, which I think would be at least controversial. But I understand that, yeah, we can discuss this later, of course. We have discussed this, of course, also already. So I would just say maybe the derivation is less impressive, and that might then certainly be the case, and I'm happy to grant this. Regarding the second horn, I completely agree that there is, that was here the absurd multiplication of alternatives. It's true. I've just presented one split of G, but there is this is highly underdetermined. It's not just that we can use G or we can use eta plus H, which already would be an underdetermination, already is an underdetermination, but it's highly underdetermined because you could basically split G in various ways. And the proposal is to use best systematization. I already have this in like the original work, but I didn't spell that out. So, but that would be one way to spell it out, I guess. And you can combine this with, obviously, parsimony, explanatory coherence would be involved in this kind of best systematization, and would give constraints on what is actually a good way to think about GR. And I think then having an interpretation on the table that has, for example, this background field here disappearing from the fundamental ontology would be a reason to think that this is a best systematization. But again, ultimately, if you think about what determines the what fixes the ontology of our world. Staying just in the classical regime is arguably not enough. So we need the quantum perspective as well to then not only see that GR is compatible with some kind of non-fundamentality of the metric field, but that this is also actually excluded as an option. And there again, you can use these kinds of redundancy and inconsistency arguments from what I said earlier. Okay. I have no idea how I'm doing with time, but that's the conclusion. Very good. So I have in this talk said that according to a dynamical spin 2 view, GR supports space-time metric non-fundamentalism. And what is important is that the direction of dependence relations cannot be read off the equations. And determining the fundamentals requires actual philosophical interpretation. For example, you have to have some unified perspective and so on and so forth. So literal or formalist interpretations, on the one hand, they kind of paint over these hidden or implicit dependence relations. And then they can lead to redundancies, and this may actually violate consistency of the theory then, or of the interpretation, right? So the theory, of course, the mathematical system may be perfectly consistent, but the view we extract may be inconsistent then. Yeah, just generally engaging with metaphysical literature more closely might be helpful for philosophy of physics. Thanks.
So, thank you very much, Ian. Normally we start with questions from the other centers, so as soon as we have them, here they are. All right. So, are there questions in Chicago?
Well, I do. Do you want to one of the cameras there. Thanks, Ian. It's great to see you, and that was a lovely talk. Congrats on the book. That's great. Very happy about that, as you know.
Thanks for asking. Yeah.
I guess I have a question. It may be as much for Niels, I'm afraid, as for you. I don't know. Because I know there's the point where you were saying, so just thinking about these arguments, if you restrict to, just to linear gravity, where H really is a small, is small, then it seems much, I don't know, I'm just wondering what you think about Chris and Dave and Niels's arguments. Do they seem kind of weaker in that case? I'm sort of trying to think of this as a kind of wedge for you to push for the full, spin 2 interpretation for GR. I don't know if you've heard me.
So I think I have, due to technical reasons, I have problems to understand what you say. So I hear your voice, but I don't. It's yeah.
Should we switch the speaker maybe then? How do I do this again? Here.
So sorry.
I'll say it again. It's okay.
Let's try this. Nick, could you say again, please?
Is this better?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. So we had this before, didn't we? So as I was saying, I'll ask you this, but well, Niels is standing there, so I'm also interested in. Okay, now you have me worried. Is it not working?
Yeah, it is working. Sorry.
Okay. So the idea was, to try and use, although you're talking about full GR here, to try to use, think about the linear gravity case, in the first place as a kind of wedge to open your argument, to get your argument going that all you sort of say, all the kind of claims about how you want to read it and doing a sort of dynamical interpretation just seem far more plausible, you know, seem really quite, I mean, if you're on board with dynamical interpretation in general, it actually seems very plausible in the linear gravity case, where things are kind of much simpler. But if you buy that, well, why not buy the full package, I guess? How do you feel about that as a way of arguing?
Still.
Is it more directed to Niels?
But you can go first, but if Niels
Yeah,
says-
so I think I would agree. I think I would agree. Why not? Or do you mean why not? So what's the point that if you end up with full GR, then also stick with full GR? Or what's the point that
I think the point is, you know, their counter arguments seem kind of weak, much weaker against the sort of linear gravity case. But once you swallow linear gravity, why not? You know, isn't it now easier to also swallow your view about the?
Yeah, I think so. I think so. Yes.
GR
Yeah.
case?
I would completely agree. I don't know what Niels.
Yes. I mean, there are different things which could be said. Do you have 2-3 minutes?
Yeah, sure, please.
So in this paper, we actually set up 2 problems. The dilemma is just a second. The first problem is about the claim that there's supposed to be a straightforward derivation. And in this first part, we kind of argue that there's no straightforward derivation of GR from spin 2 gravity in the sense of how there is, for instance, a straightforward derivation of linearized gravity from GR, right? And I think this is also acknowledged by Kian when saying he has a kind of non-literalist interpretation.
Okay, yeah.
Okay, so in that sense, there is something, let's say, extraordinary going on. And the second part of the paper is then about a dilemma, which concerns the conceptual / physical picture you actually have on the spin 2 theory view, as opposed to the picture you would normally have on GR. And we kind of find then, the spin 2 theory view to have actually problematic aspects to it with respect to how it sees instrumental tensor and also to how it sees, just coupling relationships. Now, of course, one can make moves like Kian does, and maybe rightly so, about empirical shortcuts or about best systematization. But what we're really just trying to signal clearly with this dilemma is how little physical sense, so to speak, the self-coupling relation on its own makes to us. However, a lot of people do take the self-coupling relation to be quite central for motivating their spin 2 view. And so in that sense, we think it's important to have this dilemma spelled out. You are still, I could reply to some details.
That's quite helpful then. So then because then it sounds like you're okay with the linear gravity case because there is no self-coupling, right?
Sorry, it's no self-coupling in the linearized gravity case.
So you don't have any objection to that. It's when you have put the self-coupling in that you get.
Well, I mean, first of all, so I'm not exactly sure what we're talking about then, because GR, of course, is more than linearized gravity, right? So
That's the point. That's my whole point. Is how do you feel about just the linear gravity case?
Oh yeah, I mean, yeah. The thing is,
that as a whole theory.
Right. I mean, if you have linearized gravity, however, I would say this doesn't give you GR, right? This is not GR.
No, it's not GR. No, that's my point.
Okay. And it's not even GR for a certain subsector either. I mean, it's just really, okay. Yeah, maybe I misunderstood, but
But that's my point, yes.
Yeah.
But it's a related theory.
Yes, yeah, exactly. And however, but normally would take linearized GR to be a subsector of GR, which you get through a certain limit.
Okay. So I didn't quite mean that. I meant if you just imagine sort of Fitts Pauli gravity or something, right? And that's the whole theory.
Yes.
Okay. It's nice to hear this again. Well, I was just remembering, Niels, last time we talked about this, we were up a mountain, lost in a bank of fog.
Yeah. In the snow with basketball shoes on. Yeah, this is my case. Yeah.
This is great. I really enjoyed this. I don't think we have more questions here right now.
Okay, so Baptiste,
Right, that's very interesting. I guess I have a question about already the standard reading of general relativity. Okay, so basically you try to motivate the move from asking about the reality of space-time or the reality of the electric field to the fundamentality of space-time or the electric field. But I was a bit, I think I missed something because if by your own definition of fundamentality, I wasn't clear why it is standard reading of here because the electric field depends on the matter field. In which sense, by your definition, it's still fundamental even in the standard geometrical reading.
So the standard geometrical reading would say G is fundamental.
But why? Because you say that being fundamental means being independent from other things, but it depends on the matter field.
Okay, but not for its existence.
Okay,
so not
that's what I'm missing.
Yeah. Okay.
Say a bit more about that because I was confused about this potential. Two sorts of dependence.
Okay. Yes. Thanks. That's helpful. So there are definitely different notions of dependence here involved. And when I say ontological dependence, or maybe sometimes, if you regard theories, conceptual dependence, which would be maybe a way to generalize that notion, then I'm really specifically talking about some field depending for its existence on something else. So it's really, it aligns with what you would usually say is a reading of non-fundamentality without these technical terms. Then there is some structure behind that. It can still be that it is affected by other stuff. It can still be formed, so to speak, by matter fields, for example. But this does not concern the ontological independence of that field, that this field exists on its own, basically.
I guess I see the view, but I think it's more difficult to articulate the thing because I think the way you have to think of space metric as a kind of substance that can be variously affected.
Yeah.
But if you think of the space-time metric as a kind of an actual grid or structure, and you don't think as a kind of modal substance that can be affected in different ways, then perhaps the distinction you made between ontological dependence and other sorts of dependence.
Okay.
I would tend to think of it like that's why I'm a bit uneasy with this.
Okay. I have to think about this, but maybe the following helps. So let's say we have a window, we have a stone in the world. We could shatter the window with a stone. So there might be kind of some, in your sense, dependence relation between the window, also for its existence in some sense, and the stone. But it's not that in all worlds where we have like a window and a stone, that the window depends for its existence on the stone. But that is different for space-time, the space-time metric, for the G field in what I propose here. Because, for example, if you have matter fields, you have a continuous metric field, and you have a Heisenberg uncertainty principle, then these three things don't go together conceptually so easily. And therefore, there is some inconsistency with respect to this ontological independence of the alleged posits here.
Wondering whether you make it super with the type of institution, saying something
okay.
Like very space-time to exist, but the type space-time was not stuff because it would be a different token at the same time with a different structure, something like that.
I don't see at the moment how that would help. but I have to think about this.
You could say something like when you say was a kind of benign sort of dependence, or was not ontological dependence. Not how to be a kind of ontological dependence, but ontological dependence.
It's only time that I'm talking about, yeah.
And not of type. Only one way not to describe the kind of what we could.
Yeah, maybe that. I have to think about this. Yeah, that's helpful. Thanks.
Okay, let me remind everyone to speak up sufficiently so that the conference microphone, which is automatic, will pick up whatever people say. So Alessandro has a follow-up.
Yeah, so I'm afraid that given what this says, it wouldn't count as fundamental in your sense, because to be ontologically independent, they must be freely modally recombinable as Schaffer, and in that case they won't, because you couldn't have, for example, given a certain matter distribution. In some sense, it is the property of the metric field are fixed. So you couldn't have a certain matter distribution and a certain metric field. And so the metric field would not be freely modally recombinable with the matter field. So it is not fundamental, even in your sense, without going into what kind of dependence is there, because to be ontologically independent means that you are freely modally recombinable. And in this case, they are not.
Yeah.
I mean, it is not the metric field.
Yeah. I should be happy to accept that, right? So, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, you don't need to go through all.
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah.
The whole second part of the talk.
Yeah.
Okay, Lorenzo.
So, don't understand the general stuff. Do I understand correctly that you are presupposing from the beginning that the dynamical approach to the Minkowski metric works? That there is some sort of reduction of the Minkowski metric measure fields that makes it?
For my concrete proposal, yes, at least the type of explanation works. I don't need, in the sense that I take this part and then use it in my example. It gets like modified because there is an additional field, of course. But yeah, the kind of
presupposition. Because then we can combine it with the fields, and then we can reduce that to method, and the top method field, the other one, so we have reduced the metric to method.
Yeah.
Okay, but that's helpful, but just I think for me, like the rule is like never been told exactly how the first story is supposed to work. And even worse is that when I try to inquire about that, what I am told by people like me and others, don't look at the algorithm special relative. Yes, people do the special relative, but in GR, that's where we should put that. So here, then we just get into a circle because then we never, so it's not like it's like an objection or anything, I think, but if you want to do that, it would be helpful if you finally experience how it's going to work.
To be fair, the proper dynamic approach pedagogy is not the other way around. One says, oh, it's very complicated GR. Let's first start with a very nice case of clear ontologic reduction before we show you the GR case, how it really is. So that sense, it does pull back to what normally the pedagogy of the dynamic approach is seen as.
In the GR case, it doesn't work. Anyway.
Oh, no. I don't know. This is also to be discussed, but yeah.
So, like for what I proposed here, I mean, of course, if you want to end up with the non-fundamentality of the metric field, then you should at some point agree with what I propose. But if you, basically what I proposed here was just laying out different options in some sense at least, that are then to be evaluated in terms of empirical, not empirical, but like coherence, explanatory coherence, parsimony, and these standard ways to kind of assess whether certain metaphysical theories are better than others, because we have this underdetermination in determining our ontology here. If you, of course, if you say it's definitely not possible, I'm not buying into this dynamical approach stuff, then of course half of what is on the table is just gone. And then you will have to end up with a fundamental metric field in GR. And then what you will have is that GR gives you no support whatsoever to any beyond GR physics in terms of non-fundamentality of space. And the general argument in the book and in also the papers that relate to that issue is, if we take this interpretational stance on GR, then we can actually see that from known physics, we already paved the way towards what we expect as a non-fundamental space.
So I have a question about the very last point on your conclusions, that sort of studying metaphysics is good for the philosophy of physics or something along these lines. And I would like to understand very concretely what the work done here in the project is by metaphysics. Is it just the idea that we need, if we want to make sense of, you know, how to think about space-time in terms of fundamentality or dependence or reduction, we need just to have clear notions? You know, we need to define what we mean by space-time, by fundamentality, by dependence, and so on and so forth. Or is it more than that?
So that would be the minimal, I guess, proposal.
Sure, yes, okay.
That's fine, and
that
that's
seems
uncontroversial.
Yes.
Yeah. So I think, so for example, when Jill North discusses her new reading of the substantialism relation to it, she makes the point that if we understand this in terms of fundamentality, then we finally understand what like the issue is, what the debate is about. Because at some point in the reality framed understanding of the debate, we didn't really know what kind of camps were actually, what the camps were actually fighting about. So I think I buy into this. I think that because we're not just interested in what is real, but because we are interested, I'm perfectly happy to accept that space-time is real as this table is real. So the table is real, but it's not fundamental. It depends on other real stuff, and that is probably why it is real in the first place, because there is other stuff, microstructure, that is real. But the interesting thing is then to understand these relations, these dependence relations, and make sense of how, what the theories say on the ontology of the fundamental ontology of the world. What is actually in this minimal complete set? That's, I think, the more interesting question. So that would be a reason to look into this fundamentality frames type of debate. And why use metaphysics for that? Well, because if you agree that this kind of debate is more interesting maybe than the plain and simple realism debate, to make a contrast, I'm not claiming anything about that, but I'm happy to have realism debates as well, of course. Then you should really know what you're talking about. Then you really have to have a substantive notion of fundamentality, specifically because there are these two main approaches to this, which don't necessarily go together, which may suggest that this is fundamental in one case and that is fundamental in the other case. And to some extent, that's an open question still. So metaphysicians will debate what notion is more appropriate, whether they are actually talking about the same, whether they align for our world, for example. And so I think that would be helpful for philosophy of physics. Maybe I didn't say that, but so for the proposal of my my project now, I also wrote, and that was for me maybe the more interesting part also, that the other way around was also very helpful, because metaphysicians, if they have more case studies from physics, for example, then this is also probably helpful to make these kinds of debates more precise. Yeah, and just one thing to add. So it also gives a new light on why unificatory perspectives on physics, for example, are so important. Because if we're interested in what is fundamental, then we are already buying into that we need to take into account all the dependence relations. So you could say reality is about whether certain things have certain properties. For example, whatever, you can bounce into it or something like that, very naively. And fundamentality is always about like the coherent structure of the entities in the posit. So that's already a unified perspective. So I think that's also quite interesting.
Yeah, that's very helpful. Thank you. I didn't ask because I was sort of critical or something. I just wanted to understand better the concrete benefits. And I certainly agree that I think thinking in terms of already the classical debate in the philosophy of space and time, in terms of fundamentality rather than just the terms of reality or existence, is helpful. I'm not a Leibniz or Newton scholar, but my understanding is that there's textual evidence already in those sources that this is how they thought about it.
Yeah, I think so.
But for that, we would need to go to the historian of the natural philosophy of that time. Niels is a follow-up.
Yeah, picking up on this, which we define as saying it's actually the metaphysical background you bring in which gives new life to spin 2 theory. I mean, I would say generally on physicists' evaluation of spin 2s, full spin 2s, not linear gravity, it would score worse than GR answer, right? You would use after all use GR, not full spin 2 theory. You cannot derive spin 2's GR from spin 2 theory so easily as you can derive linearized and so on and so forth and what have you. But now taking a more principled stance on what should be unifying what should be fundamental to what and so on, this kind of metaphysical background will come and give a new way of actually declaring one as actually after all more fundamental than the other, right? That would be fair to say. That's like a practical use of metaphysics. Whether you want to share this move is a different, but I think effectively happens.
I think yes, I think I agree. So if we think that we are ultimately interested not so much in what is particularly useful for physics, but what is also settling the underdetermination problem, basically, then I think that what I presented basically gives reasons to take into account this again. Take it more seriously, and also what I think is that if we settling the underdetermination problem, settling what is the true ontology of our actual world, or some world, I think involves more than just looking at the best theories as they are used in physics, but really have this more inductive approach, look at all that is not excluded, basically, and then learn from like this, what is the common core, for example, for metaphysics. So that would already, I think, be reason enough to actually look into these interpretations, because you don't, so not only just different theories, but also different interpretations of theories would then be important. So and just maybe briefly in the book, the reasoning was explicitly to look into those kinds of theories that are most likely to be to posit a fundamental space-time metric. So if you look into spin 2 theory, then this is the theory which seems, on the face of it, be just as well space-time fundamentalism. If you look into AQG, you are already kind of going to theory that doesn't seem at least to posit this. So the reasoning was to look at the most spatial temporal theories we have, and those that actually also work to some extent. It's debatable, of course. Yeah.
But this has a figure.
Yes, to raise this to the question again of moving from the reality of space-time to the fundamentality of space-time. I think there are three options. Option one, we have a debate in terms of existence. Option two, in terms of fundamentality, and option three, of both.
Yeah.
Yeah. To me, I'm worrying a bit that okay, it might help to use fundamentality, but if you want to explain everything without helping yourself with the existence or non-existence of some things, I think it's more difficult. But then, for instance, for the dynamical approach, it seems quite clear to say that according to the dynamical approach, space-time does not exist. And to me, it's easier to present things like that than saying that according to the standard geometrical approach, the metric is fundamental. According to the dynamical approach, it's not fundamental. Because it seems to me that according to both views, it's not as absolutely fundamental, because in both cases it depends on something else. Then you have the intricacies we discussed before. So would you agree that ideally we should have a rich set of tools, and people also use existence and non-existence of things?
So yeah, I definitely agree with the first part that we should have both. For example, the infamous free geometry we settled for that the topological structure of space-time, topological aspects of space-time. There we actually have some kind of issue of reality, of existence, not so much of fundamentality. So certainly we need to have these debates as well. Whether that is true for example, the G field, I'm not so sure, because if you look into the substantialism realism debate, substantialism relationalism debate, traditional debate, you could say, well, they disagree about what is fundamental, but also Leibniz could view space-time as real, because it depends on real relations between real entities. But it's still it's just not fundamental, and that's what the debate is about. And similarly, so generally, I would say I want to kind of disentangle issues, general metaphysical issues about the reality of derivative entities from like the relation between derivative entities and fundamental entities. And then certainly we need to have discussions about why is something real. Maybe there are cases where, so for example, I presented this as a naive view, but somehow I always come back to this, that existence, reality is about, to some extent at least, that it's physically significant. And this is, I think, something that is about the particular object you're looking at, whether that entity is actually physically significant, for example. But fundamentality always concerns the whole structure and is always relational, so to speak. And that would be a way. So we have to have both debates, but they may be about different things. Maybe useful also in different cases.
Yeah, so I have a question on fundamentality, and I mean, probably it's more of a metaphysical question. So, as you rightly pointed out, there are different understanding of fundamentality. One is the all grounding, and the other is the ungrounded. And from a certain point of the talk on, it seemed to me that you somehow suggested that we should more, at least for this purpose, to be more interested in the ungrounded one. or the ontological independence. And I was a bit surprised because for this reason, because in the paper of Leuenberger that you quote, I mean, the two are equivalent. At least as long as we are interested in the full ground, or in the full dependence base, they are exactly equivalent. So one entails the other and the other way around. So I couldn't really see, the difference, because if they are equivalent, whenever that thing is fundamental in one sense, it is also fundamental in the other.
Yeah.
And so I couldn't see what's the benefit of going in one direction rather than the other.
Yeah. Thanks. The benefit is related to what I said about the methodology. And that is maybe a way again to connect what metaphysics and philosophy of physics can talk about, like fruitfully. Because I think, so in the specific project I didn't look into whether space-time, spatial control structures, certain spatial control structures were needed to explain something else. But I looked whether it is like dependent on other stuff. And in a sense, it's a more local approach, you could maybe say, but it's not necessarily true, because as I said, it's always a global approach, because also the independence notion will always mean independence to everything else, with respect to everything else. So it's also global, but it's for the concrete proposal I had here, it's the notion that Beth mentions, the methodology I actually used, because I was looking into reductions of that entity. And I was not looking into indispensability arguments for that entity. But I agree, if you settle that, if you think that it is settled that the two notions actually come together, you can then use that to do additional work. But I think the methodology should basically determine which notion you use.
I don't know, in the sense that, for example, what Leuenberger does, it says that fundamental things are things that are in all the grounding bases, basically, or all the dependence bases. If you don't like the grounding. But I mean, Leuenberger really has the distinction. So you can talk about building relations and so on and so forth. But then there might be like idle entities in the grounding base. So in a sense, so you don't actually look that they are actually doing something. You just look that they are in all the grounding base. So once you want your dependence relation or building relation to be reflexive, and so once the equivalence is established, basically, I really don't see that it makes a difference, because I mean, maybe it's an epistemological difference, or it's easier for you to see what you're looking for. But in the end, I mean, it's really the same thing.
So I'm happy to accept that, but then I would still think that the way you go about this is you start from a certain notion like ontological independence or ungroundedness, and then you see, oh, I have a decent methodology that I can use. I look whether some entity is irreducible or not. Then I hopefully show, depending on what I want to show, of course, but I show that it is, for example, reducible, like in my case. Now I know it's non-fundamental, and now I can maybe move to the other notion of fundamentality and say, well, this implies then the following, so on and so forth. And that might be especially helpful if you look at the generalized way of thinking about fundamentality, namely not just absolute fundamentality in the actual sense I used it today, but also at relative fundamentality talk, right? Because even if you think maybe there is some underlying structure there might be something that is at least relatively fundamental to something else, for example, the atoms to the table. And then you can talk about, if you manage to show that the table reduces to the atoms, then you can talk about that the atoms actually determine the table and its properties and so on and so forth. I'm happy to say that this is, of course, a good way to start. Actually,
Thank you. What Chicago? No, they don't have a question. I have a question. So the spin 2 approach to gravity is, there could be, you know, at the end of the day, I think an approach that is a theory cum interpretation needs to earn its keep. The way it should be doing that would be most directly accomplished, I think, by empirical means, by showing empirical superiority over other approaches.
Yeah.
Given that it's not strictly empirically equivalent to GR, there is a possible way in which possibly we could rule, you know, empirical evidence could rule in favor of one over the other.
Yeah.
Given that, however, for the sort of well-behaved cases, they are equivalent, maybe that's going to be a very subtle and difficult business to find such a, you know, a clear ruling. Another way might be because, you know, it's more pursuit worthy than another approach in the sense that it bears a great promise for future direction of research that may eventually, of course, be, you know, justified empirically, of course, but maybe not yet. So could you maybe remind us of the usefulness of the spin 2 approach when we go to quantum gravity or understanding black hole physics or the very early universe over and above alternative approaches, if there is such a case to be made?
So I will say this. So on both points you just made, actually. So it's completely, I think I completely agree. Ultimately, we want to have, like, it would be great to have empirical reasons to rule in favor of one or the other. And there is maybe more hope when we look into the quantum version of that, because there is a sense in which the quantum version of the spin 2 approach will more easily deviate from, like, classical results from GR. And people have been making that claim historically also. I have to admit I forgot the thing I quote in the book, but there is some pretty similar idea to that. So we might be able for the quantum version, for the quantum spin 2 field approach, to get that. And then you could say, well, fruitfulness is of course, it depends, arguably. You can argue that spin 2 theory, the quantum spin 2 theory, coming from particle physics, coming from not necessarily even full-blown quantum field theory, but certain pretty general ideas about relativistic particle physics, as Weinberg has it in this soft graviton argument he presents, that this gives certain constraints then also that are taken up on the string theory, for example. Less so in other approaches, obviously, but and I would say that it was quite fruitful in that regard, because the whole business of S-matrix theory and then later versions of such takes and ultimately string theory, that was quite okay. You can argue about that, whether that was fruitful to set string theory. But I guess the majority of physicists would at least be open, maybe not the majority, but there is non-trivial, yeah, exactly. And yeah, so I think also here both cases can be made for us into approach.
Niels has a thing.
Comment or question? So in some sense, I would say there's some pragmatic or methodological advantages when you go towards the quantum of having a fixed flat background, right? So it's not can use still representations through the Lorentz group for particles and blah, 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 and so forth. But on the other hand, this advantage is outweighed by many other advantages of having, of course, for instance, is quite relative to a curved background. So right. And then again, we are in a territory where this kind of force Pintuku is very far away, right? So it's somehow what we're going to the full quantum in a way, but also the gravitational sector. There's some small advantage, I would think, but at the same time, you also want to go to the full quantum via the QT space-time regime, where you kind of do work right now without having kind of that background. Yeah, and then again, also this general question is for QT. Why give anything about particle representation specifically, right? So I could also kind of question this. So I kind of understand why it's a direct, but at the same time, I also think there's a lot of pull from the other side that this is actually, I mean, these for physical reasons, it should be not so.
No, I agree. One way in which the spin 2 approach implicitly, I would say, at least, is like helpful in terms of being destructive in a sense, is that it shows that there are certain problems with quantum field theory, right? So you get the need for a unique complete theory, for example, to use which would be a way to frame the debate, of course. The need of such a theory comes out of quantum field theory alone. You don't have to talk about well, we have GR and then we have quantum stuff going on, and we need to combine that. But no, you have a perfectly fine theory of quantum gravity, which just happens to not work at higher energies. And you have obviously you have some consistency issues in that theory, and that invites you to think about how to combine basically unitarity and relativity in a meaningful and consistent way. Maybe one or the other has to go, modify or something.
Very quickly, because we're out of time, actually.
No, okay.
Okay, so please join me in thanking Guillaume for his talk. So, and thank you, Chicago. See you next week.
Yes, see you next week. And enjoy the rest of the week. I guess you have lots on.
Yes, we do have lots on. That's right, yes.
Nice to see everyone.
All right, bye, bye.
Bye.
What's my thought? Yeah, oh.
Stop the live stream recording.
Wait. Recording. Stop recording.